Generally, dyslexic learners are expected to have more difficulties in reading and writing than in listening and speaking. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that speaking and listening can be seen as easier for dyslexic learners. However, some dyslexic learners will also have problems processing spoken language, so that's an issue to bear in mind.
So you suggest that speaking is the easiest skill to develop for many dyslexic learners?
Yes, I would. However, many dyslexic learners may have a narrow range of vocabulary and also a restricted knowledge of grammatical structures. Another issue for them is low self-confidence when it comes to speaking.
Would you suggest some general tips for teaching dyslexic learners?
It's difficult to apply general tips because each learner will have different difficulties and different levels in different areas, and so that can be a challenge for teachers. It's really not true that one type of accommodation can apply to everybody, so it's also a problem that one day can be better than the next, and so what might work on one day might not work on the next. I would also say that probably their concentration span will be shorter, so that's an issue also to bear in mind. If I were to summarise some things which are really important for teachers, I would say be open, be flexible, and be patient with the learners.
How do you organise listening activities when teaching dyslexic learners?
It's really crucial to be aware of what the aims are of the listening activities and to communicate these to the learners, whether it be discriminating between similar sounding words, or listening for gist, or listening for detail. It's also important to explain the relevance of the task for real life, as this will be extremely motivating for the dyslexic learners.
What do you suggest teachers' instructions should be like?
They should be crystal clear. And it's important also to check that the learners have understood before you actually ask them to perform the task. This is obviously important for everybody, but it's vital for dyslexic learners. It's also helpful to include more than one sense when giving the instructions. So you could say the instructions and at the same time write some key words on the board, and also provide a checklist for the learners to see that they've understood.
What are the biggest problems concerning listening tasks?
I would say the biggest problem is that a listening task is very rarely a purely listening task. It's normally a combination of both listening and reading, or listening and writing. So it's important for dyslexic learners not to be required to take notes, but you could ask them to respond physically, which is done through, for example, TPR or some of the Young Learners exams. So they could be asked to manipulate with pictures, either to put them into order or to match pictures. They could be asked to draw a sketch of what they've heard, or they could be simply asked to raise their hand.
Is there any other way of checking listening?
Yeah, listening can be checked orally as well, so they could be asked to paraphrase what they've just heard, either in the target language or in their own language.
What about checking understanding in the listening tasks?
A really helpful thing for dyslexic learners is to be able to check, first of all, in pairs or in small groups before checking with the whole class.
So what do you see problematic in frequently used listening strategies?
Well, dictations are often used to check understanding of a listening, and some methodologists say that dyslexic learners could be asked to complete a gapped text instead of completing the whole dictation. But this is actually problematic for dyslexic learners, as they have to orientate themselves in the gapped text as well, which is challenging for them.
What accommodations would you suggest are suitable for dyslexic learners then?
It's important for them to have time to process the instructions, both before and during the task. So I would say pacing the task is extremely important. In a typical classroom, it's important to remember that teachers will always have some students with learning difficulties, some gifted students, some students who are more advanced, and so it's very normal to differentiate or to tier the tasks. It's important for dyslexic learners to be able to really develop their learning skills and strategies, and so they need straightforward explanations of the task and of what you're expecting, whether it be catching words in the listening, or listening for repeated words, understanding the meaning by recognising the tone of voice, predicting what the listening might be about. It's also important for them to relax and to really feel that they're in a safe environment. It's important also for the teacher to be encouraging, as this will lower the anxiety. And it's also good to get them to practice outside of the classroom as well.
Now let us move on to speaking skills. What do you find important in developing speaking skills in dyslexic learners?
Well, it's a very broad topic. Obviously, there are many different types of activities, whether it be drilling and memorising activities or more fluency-orientated activities. But if I might speak about drilling and memorising, these type of activities are actually very important and beneficial for dyslexic learners, as it helps them to store language in their long-term memory and to achieve success. So it's great to include different drama games which involve actually drilling and memorising in a fun way.
What types of activities would you then suggest for forming fluency in dyslexic learners?
Well, if we speak about information gap activities or role plays, if we have some dyslexic learners, we could differentiate by giving them easier roles which involve repetition and so on.
What are the key points of successful speaking activities?
Again, it's very important to be very clear when giving instructions, to give very explicit explanations, and also to give planning time before we actually ask them to perform the task. Then it's good to pre-teach the vocabulary or to revise vocabulary and structures which they might need.
And what do you think about mistakes?
If a student makes a mistake, it's good to retrace the steps rather than just pointing out what was wrong. And there are many different drama activities where actually mistakes are a part of the learning process.
Is there anything we shouldn't forget when dealing with dyslexic learners?
It's good to remember that many dyslexic learners have special gifts in the area of arts or drama, and so when we come to teaching, we can try to involve drama activities in our lessons, as these involve emotions, moods and movement.